A light gray Pegasus with a flowing blonde mane and tail glided smoothly through the skies above Ponyville, her brown male uniform crisp and her satchel snug around her waist. Derpy Hooves descended gently beside a quaint wooden mailbox adorned with tiny white ribbons. Tilting her head, she squinted her crossed yellow eyes at the engraved numbers on the side, then gave a cheerful nod once they matched her delivery list. She reached into her satchel, pulled out 2 neatly sealed white envelopes, and slipped them into the mail slot. With her job done, she closed the satchel, flapped her wings, and took off again, heading back toward the post office to drop it off. Her mail route for the day was finally complete. But Derpy's day wasn't over. She still had plans, one of which was baking a batch of her signature muffins to deliver to Sugar Cube Corner. Baking was more than just a pastime for her. It was a beloved tradition, something she'd learned from her father, who had passed down the family's secret muffin recipe. It was a recipe meant only for Hooves family members, never to be shared, treasured like a piece of their history. Later that evening, Derpy returned home, pushing open the wooden front door and trotting inside with a bounce in her step. But as she moved toward the kitchen, she froze. The heavy metal door to the cellar, normally locked and sealed, was wide open. Her eyes slowly drifted downward to the floor, where one of the tiles was slightly raised, just enough to reveal the hidden button beneath it. Her heart skipped a beat. That button was the only way to open the cellar door, and she hadn't touched it. Fear tightening in her chest, Derpy Hooves stepped into the dark cellar and pulled the heavy metal door shut behind her with a resounding clang. She made sure the latch clicked firmly into place. No pony would follow her down here, or get out. The air grew colder as she descended the creaking wooden steps, each hoof step groaning beneath her weight. From below, muffled voices echoed up through the darkness. One belonged to a small filly, calm and conversational, while the other, clearly a grown mare, trembled with panic, her tone brittle with fear. When Derpy reached the bottom of the stairs, the dim glow of a single flickering bulb revealed the scene. Standing in the center of the room was her daughter, Dinky Doo, staring up at a unicorn mare suspended by her forelegs, her hooves bound tightly to a rusted metal hook overhead. The unicorn's mint green coat was streaked with sweat, her cyan mane tangled and clinging to her tear-stained face. A golden lyre cutie mark adorned her flank. She writhed against the ropes, her eyes wide with horror as they flicked between Dinky and Derpy. Above her head, her horn had been broken clean off, the jagged stump sparking faintly. The missing piece sat ominously in a white bucket nearby. In the shadows, another small figure stood silently, Dinky. Her pale purple coat and blonde mane stood out in the gloom, her wide yellow eyes now fixed on her mother. There was no fear in her face, only concern, as if she were waiting for some kind of reassurance. Derpy Hooves exhaled a long, quiet breath, her chest easing as she realized the situation wasn't as dire as she'd feared. For a moment, she thought she'd have to deal with 2 frightened ponies, but it was only her daughter standing there, and Derpy knew exactly how to handle Dinky. She stepped further into the cellar, her tone turning warm and melodic. "Dinky, dear," she cooed softly. The unicorn mare hanging from the ceiling flinched, but said nothing. She clung to a fragile sliver of hope. Maybe this was some terrible mistake. Maybe Derpy would cut her down and help her escape. But then she heard that voice, the gentle sing-song tone not of concern, but of motherly affection. It wasn't for her. And when Derpy spoke again, the hope shattered completely. "I told you not to come down here, didn't I?" Dinky lowered her head and gave a small nod. "Yes, Mama. But what is all this?" She gestured around the room, her voice carrying more curiosity than fear. The cellar was dimly lit and steeped in silence, but everywhere the eye landed told a grim story. Heavy chains hung from the ceiling, some ending in blood-stained hooks. Several of those hooks bore grisly loads. Pony corpses, stripped of their skin and missing limbs and heads, their torsos sliced open with surgical precision. A nearby metal trolley was lined with instruments: a scalpel, a cleaver, a hacksaw, a blood-specked knife, and a pair of stained pliers, each one used, each one with a history. Against one wall, a wooden shelf displayed an array of pony skulls, their sizes and shapes suggesting they came from both adults and foals. Some had been painted in pastel hues to match the coats they once belonged to. Others remained bare bone, raw and grim. Framed on the walls like hunting trophies were pairs of small, severed filly wings, carefully arranged like butterflies in display cases. But the most unsettling of all was the small hook near the cellar entrance. Hanging from it was a scarf, not made of fabric, but of cutie marks, each one carefully stitched together, their edges still bearing the faint traces of the ponies who once wore them. Dinky looked around in silence, her golden eyes wide, not with fear, but with fascination. Derpy's soft smile never faltered. "Well, you see, Dinky Doo," Derpy Hooves finally said, her voice soft and almost playful, as she trotted toward the small hook by the cellar entrance. With gentle care, she removed the scarf hanging there, a patchwork of cutie marks stitched together like a twisted trophy, and wrapped it neatly around her neck. She turned and walked back toward her daughter, her steps calm, almost casual. Behind them, the unicorn mare suspended from the rusted meat hook was panting heavily, her breath shaky. She tried to summon magic, a last desperate attempt to free herself, but her horn sparked weakly. A jolt of pain surged through her skull, and she cried out, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. "Every pony has a number," Derpy continued, her tone still light, as if she were explaining something simple to a curious student. "And when it's drawn, I go and collect them. I know every pony's name, where they live, even where they've gone if they've left Ponyville. That's the advantage of being a male mare." "But Mama," Dinky asked again, her voice small but firm, her eyes drifting toward the unicorn mare who thrashed against her bonds, struggling to free herself from the blood-stained hook. "Why is Lyra Heartstrings tied to that big fishing hook over there?" Derpy giggled at the question. Without hesitation, she launched herself into the air and flew straight toward Lyra. She yanked Lyra from the hook and then slammed her back down onto it. The sharpened steel pierced through Lyra's spine with a sickening crunch. She let out a piercing scream, her body jerking as blood poured from the wound and spilled down her legs. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized she could no longer feel anything below her waist. She was completely paralyzed. The pain overwhelmed her, and she collapsed against the hook, sobbing, blood pooling beneath her. "Those aren't fishing hooks, dearie," Derpy said as she landed softly on the cellar floor. "They're meat hooks. I managed to get them from Griffinstone. You see, griffins aren't like us. They're omnivores. Miss Cheerilee may not have gone over that in school, but they don't just eat fruits and vegetables. They eat meat and fish." She smiled warmly at her daughter, as if she were still giving a lesson, one she expected Dinky Doo to understand. "Oh, I see," Dinky Doo replied, tilting her head thoughtfully. "But that still doesn't really explain why Lyra Heartstrings is tied to the hook." Derpy Hooves gave a warm smile and reached out to ruffle her daughter's mane affectionately. "Good question, sweetie," she said cheerfully, then turned to the tool-laden trolley and picked up a hacksaw. With a quick flap of her wings, she lifted herself into the air, hovering just above the trembling, suspended unicorn. Lyra's eyes widened with dread as she realized what was about to happen. She shook her head frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Let me show you," Derpy said sweetly, then met Lyra's horrified gaze. "Make sure you're watching closely." "Derpy, no, no, what are you doing?" Lyra cried, her voice cracking. "I thought we were friends." "We are friends," Derpy Hooves replied with a giggle, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes as she lined up the saw against Lyra's hind leg. Best friends, but your number came up, and that's just part of life. With that, Derpy began sawing. The teeth of the blade bit into Lyra's leg with a grating crunch, sawing through muscle and bone. Lyra screamed, a piercing, blood-curdling sound that echoed through the cellar. Dinky Doo didn't flinch. She simply watched in wide-eyed fascination as the leg began to separate. Derpy Hooves winced at the noise, pausing mid-cut. The limb hung by a few stubborn strands of sinew. She turned and flew back to the trolley, setting the saw down with care. "I'll be right back," Derpy said calmly, turning to her daughter. "Could you keep an eye on Lyra for me? I know she's paralyzed and her horn's gone, but let's be extra sure, all right?" "All right, Mama," Dinky said, nodding over the soft sobs and broken breathing coming from Lyra. "I'll keep a close eye on her." Derpy smiled warmly and patted her daughter's head before flying swiftly out of the cellar. As the door creaked on its hinges, Lyra looked toward it, her only possible escape, then turned to Dinky with desperate eyes. "Dinky, please," she whispered through tears. "This isn't right. You have to get out of here. Go to the police. Tell some pony what's happening." But Dinky only shook her head slowly, her face unreadable. "I'm sorry, Miss Lyra," she said quietly. "Mama said your number was up." "But this isn't okay," Lyra heartstrings cried, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "This is murder. Your mother is a murderer. You can't possibly want to be like her." Dinky Doo's expression didn't shift. Instead, she smiled sweetly, her yellow eyes wide and calm. "Yes, I do," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "This is how she makes her special muffins, and to bake them just right, she needs other ponies to make them taste great." Lyra's breath caught. Dinky had understood far too much, far too quickly, and she wasn't scared. That alone made Lyra's blood run colder than anything else in the room. "What will your friends think?" Lyra shouted, struggling against the ropes that dug into her skin. "When they find out you're helping your mother with this nightmare? What will they say when they know you're part of this shit?" Before she could say another word, a sudden gust of wind swept through the cellar as Derpy Hooves flew back into the room. In one hoof, she clutched a rag. Her eyes, once playful and soft, were sharp now, hard with fury. Without hesitation, she flew straight to Lyra. Before the unicorn could scream again, Derpy shoved the rag deep into her mouth and between her teeth, muffling her cries, then tied it tightly behind her head. "Don't you dare fill my daughter's head with garbage like that," Derpy hissed, her voice low and venomous. Lyra thrashed weakly, shaking her head back and forth, trying to spit the cloth out, but only managed to soak it with saliva. "And don't use that kind of language in front of my foal. Show some respect." Derpy turned to Dinky Doo, her expression softening instantly, like a switch flipping. "Mama's sorry you had to hear that kind of talk, sweetheart. Some ponies just don't understand." The cellar was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the muffled sobs of the mare hanging from the hook. Derpy Hooves returned to her grim task, lifting the bloodied hacksaw from the trolley once more. She hovered beside Lyra, positioning the blade against the same mangled hind leg she had begun working on earlier. With practiced precision, she began to saw again, the sound of metal grinding through bone filling the chamber. Lyra could do nothing but scream into the gag, her cries reduced to broken wails as tears streamed down her face. Finally, with one final tug, the leg came free and dropped to the floor with a sickening thud. Derpy turned her gaze to Lyra's other leg, already raising the hacksaw, but just as she moved to begin, the blade froze in midair, suspended in a glowing yellow aura. Startled, Derpy glanced back and saw her daughter standing still, her horn lit with magic. "Can I do the next leg, please?" Dinky Doo asked, her voice calm and curious, as if asking to stir batter in the kitchen rather than participate in something far darker. Derpy stared at her for a moment, surprised, but then smiled. "Go right ahead," Derpy Hooves said cheerfully, stepping aside with a proud smile. She watched as Dinky Doo trotted forward, taking her place. The filly's eyes were focused, her magic steady as she gripped the hacksaw. Derpy moved to the side of the suspended unicorn, gently holding Lyra's remaining hind leg in place. "But be careful, sweetie. Don't hurt yourself." Dinky nodded silently, determination written on her young face. The saw hovered in her magical grasp as she adjusted her stance. Lyra, bound and broken, bit down hard on the rag stuffed between her teeth. Saliva soaked the cloth as she turned her head away, unable to watch the nightmare continue. Her shoulders trembled with helpless sobs. Then, with a flick of her magic, Dinky began. The blade moved back and forth, slow at first, then faster, more confident. The sound of a metal grinding against bone echoed through the cellar, filling every corner of the cold, dimly lit space. It took time. Dinky's magic wasn't as strong as any other adult unicorn's magic, so she couldn't cut as fast, but eventually the limb gave way. With a dull thump, the severed leg hit the ground, blood pooling beneath it after Derpy had let go of it. Lyra didn't move. She kept her face turned to the wall, her eyes squeezed shut, her breath coming in weak, broken gasps as she cried silently into the rag. None of this felt real. The friend she once shared conversations and music with, the silly mail mare who sometimes mixed up deliveries, there was no way this was the same pony. And now, even more horrifying, Derpy's daughter was learning to do the same. Not just baking muffins, but this. Dinky Doo looked up at her mother, Derpy Hooves, who had just flown over and carefully lifted Lyra off the meat hook, holding the injured mare gently in her arms. Dinky asked, "What's next, Mama?" "Now, we need to bring her over to that metal table there so we can cut off her front legs next," Derpy explained cheerfully. "Once that it is done, we can start removing her organs before we can skin and debone her." Dinky's voice bubbled with anticipation. "Then we can bake the muffins?" "Yes, we can bake the muffins," Derpy affirmed, her tone unsettlingly cheerful as she hauled Lyra towards the metal table. The surface was marred with old, dried bloodstains. With a grunt, Derpy laid the unconscious unicorn onto her back. Dinky dutifully handed her mother the blood-stained hacksaw. Derpy Hooves gazed down at Lyra heartstrings, her expression unreadable. "Is she okay?" Dinky asked, her curiosity laced with a hint of unease. Derpy pressed her ear to Lyra's chest, pausing for a long moment before straightening up. "She's still breathing, just unconscious." Derpy Hooves untied Lyra's front legs, splaying them out on the cold metal. "Do we wake her up?" Dinky questioned as she watched her mother. "She doesn't need to be awake for this, or for the other things we are going to do," Derpy replied reassuringly, as she pressed the hacksaw against Lyra's left front leg. The Pegasus began to sever Lyra's front leg, working slowly and meticulously with a saw. Gradually, the unconscious unicorn lost all of her limbs. Derpy Hooves carefully set the hacksaw down before trotting over to a small trolley positioned near one of the meat hooks. She picked up a scalpel from the trolley and then turned around, walking directly back to Lyra, who remained motionless on the table with her eyes closed. "Dinky, please bring me 3 buckets," Derpy Hooves instructed her filly. Dinky Doo nodded eagerly and dashed off to retrieve the buckets. After a short while, she returned, and Derpy directed her to place 1 bucket on the floor beside the table, while the other 2 were positioned next to the gray Pegasus. Dinky Doo's eyes never wavered from her mother's steady hand as she gently pressed the scalpel against Lyra's delicate neck. The tension in the air was thick, but Dinky's heart raced with determination. With a burst of concentration, she summoned her yellow magical aura, weaving it carefully around the cold metal bucket. Slowly, she lifted the bucket toward the unconscious unicorn, poised to catch the precious blood that was about to flow. Every movement was deliberate, every breath held in silent anticipation, as if the moment itself was suspended in time. Her mother stood perfectly still, her face a mask of quiet resolve, as if she was hesitating and rethinking her actions. Then, with a sudden flick of her wrist, the scalpel cut through the skin, and a thin stream of deep red began to seep out. Dinky gasped softly, her small frame trembling as she raised the bucket higher, ensuring not a single drop was lost. The blood dripped steadily now, a vivid contrast against the pale fur of the unicorn, and in that fragile moment, Dinky felt a mixture of awe and responsibility, knowing that she was helping preserve something vital and sacred. The crimson flow from Lyra's neck slowed gradually until it ceased entirely, marking the end of the unicorn's life. Dinky Doo carefully set the bucket on the cold floor and watched silently as her mother returned to the metal trolley. There, Derpy Hooves methodically donned gloves and a surgical mask, her movements calm yet purposeful. Derpy turned to her daughter, her voice tender but firm. "Why don't you go upstairs and play in your room?" she suggested gently. "Once I've finished harvesting, deboning, and skinning Lyra, you can help me bake muffins. Afterwards, we'll carefully remove Lyra's cutie marks to craft a scarf for me. And perhaps something special for you, too." Dinky's eyes sparkled with hope as she asked, "Promise?" Derpy's smile was soft but resolute as she replied with a squeak, "Promise." Watching her daughter trot up the stairs, Derpy steeled herself to begin the grim work ahead. "Here you go, Pinkie Pie," Derpy Hooves said cheerfully as she placed a small, neatly wrapped box onto the counter of Sugar Cube Corner. The pink mare's eyes lit up with excitement as she carefully lifted the lid, revealing 18 of Derpy's famous muffins, each one fluffy and golden, still warm from the oven. The scent of fresh baking filled the air, mingling with the sweet aroma of cupcakes and pastries that already decorated the bakery. Derpy's voice carried a proud warmth as she explained, 18 of my famous muffins, freshly baked at home." It was clear these treats were made with love and Derpy Hooves' secret ingredient, and Pinkie Pie couldn't wait to share them with her customers. The gray Pegasus and her daughter, Dinky Doo, stood beside the counter, watching eagerly as Pinkie Pie carefully arranged the muffins inside the glass display case. The display was already filled with an assortment of baked goods, from colorful cupcakes to crunchy cookies. But now these special muffins found a new home right next to some ordinary ones the cakes had made earlier that day. Dinky's eyes sparkled with pride as she sat perched on her mother's back, her tiny hooves tapping with excitement. The bakery buzzed with the gentle hum of chatter and the clinking of teacups. But in that moment, the simple act of placing muffins on a shelf felt like the start of something wonderful. Pinkie Pie glanced up, her curiosity bubbling over as she asked, "So, these are the same muffins you baked last week, right?" Derpy nodded with a warm smile, her voice tinged with happiness as she added, "They are, and they're extra special because my daughter, Dinky Doo, decided to help me, Pinkie." The little filly beamed with pride, her cheeks flushed with excitement at the mention of her contribution. Pinkie Pie bounced on the spot, her mind racing with ideas. "Oh, maybe she can get her cutie mark from baking muffins?" she suggested enthusiastically, her eyes twinkling with encouragement. Derpy and Dinky exchanged glances, their eyes following Pinkie's energetic hops up and down as she envisioned the possibilities. "Perhaps," Derpy mused, her voice soft but hopeful. "What do you think, Dinky?" The filly thought for a moment, her tiny face serious before breaking into a wide, joyful grin. "That would be great," she exclaimed, her voice filled with determination.